Well, God bless everyone. Very good to have everyone here. It's a blessing to teach God's word and to be a part of this wonderful family. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I know it's sometimes it's late in the evening, depending on where you are, but I'm real thankful you're here and glad to be able to share the word with you. Thank you for your prayers and all your love. So tonight, before we get started into Genesis 47, I'd like to do a little review of last week. Jacob had left Canaan for Egypt, and he made a stop in Beersheba with his family, and he offered sacrifices there at a familiar altar that was built earlier. And God spoke to him in visions during the night. And God told him not to be afraid to go to Egypt, that he was going to make a great nation there. And he also told him that he would be with him and he would bring him back. And Joseph, the son that he loved so much, would be with him at his death. As you remember, "Will close your eyes" was the way he put it. So he took the whole group, including the flocks, the herds, the livestock, headed to Egypt. So we went over the list of sons. There was quite a few verses that went over his sons and others that came from Egypt. And there were 66 in the group, not including Jacob. And of course, the three that were in Egypt were Joseph and his two sons. So that made 70 that finally ended up in Egypt of Jacob's descendants, his family, his blood family, is a way to say it. Now, finally, Jacob gets to see Joseph. Joseph was in his chariot and he comes out to meet his father, and it's a very emotional meeting. You know, Jacob had been grieving for some 22 years, thinking his son Joseph had been killed, but not really giving up hope, as we can see how the phrases were worded. So we ended up last week with Joseph telling his brothers that he was going to speak to Pharaoh about their arrival, and Joseph rehearsed with them, told them what to say when Pharaoh asked him questions. He gave them wisdom, knowing the situation there and knowing the disdain that Egyptians have for shepherds. You know, they've got this thing, an anti-shepherd bias. And, there's a lot of people that try to figure this out. Some think they were vegans, they were vegetarians. And we're going to see something that's going to kind of make that seem feasible. We don't know exactly. They did have they had herds. We're going to see that for sure. But if they use them for food, maybe not so much. Maybe for hides and skins and milk or something like that. You'll just have to draw your own conclusions on that. And we're going to see some things that give some supporting evidence that maybe they were vegans. So we're going to continue in the next chapter, which is um, Genesis chapter 47. Now I'm going to have to close some stuff back here. And I'm going to pull up my bunches of stuff here. All right, we're going to turn to Genesis 47. And of course, as you know, I use the RV as the text for the teaching tonight, and I utilize the REV commentary, Dennis Prager's commentary on the Old Testament, on Genesis, and I use different searches on the internet to verify and get some more information to make the teachings more complete and helpful. So I think you should be able to, in just a moment, see Genesis 47. Still coming up, I guess. There it is. Okay. All right. So then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they own have come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen." And from among his brothers, which he had a bunch of them, there were a total of 12. He was one of them, and he took 5 and presented them to Pharaoh. Doesn't name who they are, but he took 5 as his brothers. So Joseph lets Pharaoh know that his father, brothers, and their livestock have arrived from Canaan and that they are currently in the land of Goshen. They had agreed on that. And Goshen, as we know, is on the northeast side of the Nile Peninsula. If you've ever looked at a map, and I showed us one here not too long ago, the Nile just breaks into lots of little fingers and it makes this large delta of extremely rich land because of the sediments in the rivers. It's called bottomland. Back in Missouri, I lived on the Missouri River, and there was this huge flat area where you could tell after Noah's flood in the ice ages that there'd been a lot of water that swept through there and flattened the land near the river. And the river would move over the centuries somewhat. And in this flat land, they call it bottomland. And it was the most valuable land in Missouri for agriculture because it was rich. Because every time the Missouri would flood, the waters would slow down and they would drop the fertile topsoil that had been washed into the river from upstream. And so you have these huge, I remember as a kid, I'd drive through the bottoms. We had a drive-in movie over in Henrietta. And, you know, us guys and girls and everybody would go over to the drive-in on Friday nights. And the corn would be, it was over 6 feet tall. I mean, and they would have 2 or 3 heads of corn, which is, you normally don't get that much, but it was there because the soil was so rich. And so this is the land of Goshen. And this is perfect land for, livestock because the grass is wonderful. And so what's going to happen? They're going to eat, they're going to get fat, they're going to produce milk, all these wonderful things that you want when you're raising livestock. So he confirms that they're a land in the Goshen and they've got their sheep, their goats, their livestock. And Joseph takes these 5 brothers to Pharaoh. Let's look at verse 3. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" Well, the guys were ready for that question, right? Oops. They were ready for that question. And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds," very respectful, "both we and our fathers." We come from a long line of shepherds, which was very common in the ancient Bibles. What your dad did, you did. You taught him. Like we know Jesus' dad was a carpenter, construction guy, taught his son. People who worked in silver, gold, whatever the arts, their dads taught their sons so they would have a way to provide for their families, income, a good job, and they would train them. And so that's what he told them, that we've come from we've been shepherds as long, and both we and our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, because the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. So now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." That's beautifully put, very clear, very honest, very respectful. And, and then they're answering like what Joseph said, because the brothers answered Pharaoh the way Joseph had instructed them. They told him the truth about their occupation, despite the disdain that Egyptians had for shepherds. They said they had come to sojourn. Now, this is an interesting word. And we read about it with Abraham and others. They said they sojourned in the land, and that means they traveled. And they didn't reside. They were like resident strangers, resident aliens. It was temporary. When Abraham and Isaac and all those guys, they would settle in one area, then they get up and move, settle in another area, get up and move, following the good grass, following the water. And so this is what he said, we come to this land. And so this takes away the idea we're here to stay. We want to become citizens. They never said any of that. They're sojourners. And I think that's very important because let's take a quick look back in Genesis 15. I'll bring this up on the screen. In Genesis 15, verse 13, and he said to Abram, this is God, "No, yes, no, that your offspring will live as sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years." So here's the prophecy coming to pass. He's already told Abram about this going to happen in the future. Now, this 400 years, of course, you know, these guys aren't privy to all this stuff, you know, but this is a good indication of God's prophecy that to Abram coming to pass. Let's take another look here. Another thing here that I think it's interesting is there is a we're going to see this develop as God promoting empathy. Let's take a look at Exodus. And this is a big theme in the Old Testament and throughout, where when you read the Ten Commandments and you read God's commandments, he's always, it's like he wants us to be empathetic of others. It's like the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so there's this kind of theme here, and I want to point this out by showing a few verses in the Old Testament. See if you see this theme here. In Exodus 22:22, it says, you must not mistreat any widow or father's child. If you mistreat them, they will cry out to me, and I will hear their cry, and my wrath will grow hot, and I will kill you with the sword, so your wives will be widows and your children will be fatherless. Well, that's pretty intense. And so let me go up to the real verse that I wanted to read, but that's good to know. Verse 21, you must not wrong a foreigner, nor are you to oppress him, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. So God is talking to his people in, this is, of course, in Exodus as they're going away. He's telling them, remember, remember. And this, when you come across foreigners, you're not to oppress them, for you were foreigners. Remember? There's kind of an empathy thing here. Let's take a look in Leviticus 19. Oh, first of all, let's jump ahead in Exodus 23. We're here in this book. Let's go down to verse 9. Do not oppress a foreigner because you know how a foreigner feels. That's very empathetic, since you are foreigners in the land. And now let's take a look at Leviticus 19:34. The stranger who lives as a foreigner with you must be to you as a native born among you, and you are to love him as yourself, for you lived as foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your God. But you can see that the Jews went away from this. If you're a Gentile, no, get away. Well, maybe we'll make you, at the gate, a Gentile at the gate. There's different levels of that you could be, but God, that was not God's heart. Come on in. Abraham was a Gentile. There weren't any Jews until Israel with Jacob. And so this was his heart. He wanted to be an all-inclusive God. In Deuteronomy 10, if you wanted to be a part of God's family, if you wanted to be a part of this chosen group, you could be. And then there would be rules. You got to be circumcised, and then all the people in the family have to. And we've read that in Genesis. Look at Deuteronomy 10 in verse 17. I'm going to read a few verses here. For Yahweh your God, he is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, the mighty and the awesome one, who does not show partiality, nor does he take a bribe. That's good. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow. That keeps coming up. Widows, orphans, and he loves the foreigner by giving him food and clothing. Therefore, love the foreigner, for were foreigners in the land of Egypt. You are to fear Yahweh your God. You are to serve him, and you are to cling to him, and you are to swear by his name. He is your praise, and he is your God, who has done for you these great and awesome things that your eyes have seen. We're talking about the stuff that happened in Egypt. Your fathers went down to Egypt as 70 persons. He is now drawing way back to the part that we're reading right now, and says, and now Yahweh your God has made you as numerous as the stars of heaven. So all this stuff fits together, the prophecy to Abraham, and then we see this, how God is very compassionate to people. And so, even if the Egyptians wanted to be involved, they should open arms. They were to help, but there'd always be conditions. You just couldn't bring in a lot of junk. You had to follow certain conditions, and that's okay. Let's go. I want to talk about this number of people here. Remember here it says, your God will make you as numerous as the stars of heaven. And remember all those prophecies over and over again to Abraham and Isaac, stars of the sea, and all this stuff. So how many people actually did show up? I mean, we had 70 to go in Egypt. And by the time they left, those hundreds of years later, there's a verse. Let's take a quick look here in Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. This is the fastest way for me to get there. 12 and verse 37. Okay, the children of Israel traveled from Ramses to Succoth. This is now, we're going to talk about Ramses. This is an area of the country there that carried the names of Ramses. There's a dynasty of Ramses, or a bunch of Ramses in Egypt. 600,000 on foot who were men. So you got 600,000 on foot who were men leaving Egypt for the promised land. So that didn't include the women. Now we know by normal standards, and you can check it in the population today, men and women are very close to equal in proportions. It's about a 50-50 ratio in a population. And then I've learned that there's a couple other places where it shows the elderly probably weren't counted in this, and maybe even children weren't. So you got 600,000 men. So let's double that. 600,000 times 2, that's 1.2 million, right? And then you've got the elderly and the others that weren't counted. So you could have between a million, wait just a minute, am I doing this right? Yeah, 1.6. So it is thought that this could have been between 2.5 million when you add it all up with the elderly and the children that weren't counted, the whole deal. So we're getting up to what people back then would call sand of the sea. Even if it was 1 million people in a group traveling up from Egypt to Canaan, that is a monstrous responsibility. Gosh, God was with Moses. That had to have been one heck of a job when you got up to 2.5 million people that are traveling with you. And not only that, it ends up that they upset God by their behaviors and their unbelief, and it ended up taking them 40 years, which should have just taken a few months. So back to Genesis chapter 5. Pharaoh spoke to Joseph. Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Very gracious. Have your father and your brothers dwell in the best of the land. This Pharaoh was blessed by Joseph, and he knows that if it wasn't for Joseph, they would have been in a bad, bad way. But it's interesting. God gave Pharaoh, an unbeliever, right? They worshiped Ra. I think that was one of the gods. I don't know if the sun god or what. God gave this unbeliever Pharaoh dreams. He sets it all up. So Joseph, the hidden hand of God, gets it set up. So Joseph interprets those dreams and tells him what's going to happen about the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. And then he sets Joseph in a position to administer the work that would be necessary to make sure that they survive. And so God is making provision for survival. He's making provision for Jacob's children so that they can grow. And it's going to take hundreds of years. The patience of God is amazing to build the nation of Israel. Some probably 2 million to 2.5 million people coming out of Egypt much later than now. But this is the beginnings. So he gets that. And then he goes on to say, the best in the land, let them dwell in the land of Goshen, this rich bottomland near the Delta. And if you know of any capable men among you, let them then put them in charge of my livestock. So the trust and respect that he had for Joseph, it's like most of us. If we see a couple people that are really good in the family, we have an idea that, well, the family is probably pretty trustworthy. That's not always the case, but it often can be. And so this wonderful relationship with Pharaoh was passed on to his brothers and said, you know, anybody that are capable, put them in charge of my livestock. So back in Genesis 45:17, we won't turn to that right now, but Pharaoh had made this promise to Joseph. You know, we knew that he's going to do this, allowing his fathers and brothers to live in the best part of the land. And now, in addition to that, he wants capable men to be in charge of the royal livestock. So the trust Pharaoh had in Joseph's characters and ability is reflected upon how he viewed his family. So Joseph brought in Jacob, his father. Now he's going to introduce his dad. So he talks to Pharaoh and says what he says. Now he's going to introduce Jacob, his dad, his father, and stood before Pharaoh. And so what did Jacob do? He blessed Pharaoh. This is a big deal. You know, sometimes, you know, when you blessings aren't to be taken, we take them lightly. Oh, God bless you. You know, at the end of a letter, God bless you. But I mean, I don't take them that way anymore. When I say that, I expect it to be powerful. I expect it to happen. I expect something to change for the better. And so I think that's how the ancients thought of it too. And it's interesting here that yesterday it was Nisha and Shaquille's 9th wedding anniversary. I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment here, I think. Click the right button, maybe. I guess I'm not going to. Maybe I will. All right. Give me a minute. Okay, so I'm not sharing, right? Oh, no, I am. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. So what happened? Like the day before yesterday, I get a WhatsApp text, John and I say, and then Shaquille says, hey, tomorrow is our Nisha and I's 9th wedding anniversary. And we said, so cool, you know, and we gave our greetings and, you know, little cards and stuff. And he says, I want you to be a part of our cake cutting. You know how the Pakistanis are in cutting cakes. Anybody who's been in the morning prayer fellowship or other times, when there's a birthday, they got a cake. And whether it's my birthday or anybody else's birthday or one of their birthdays, they got a cake. And so they cut cakes, and that's what we did. So John says, gosh, I'm not going to be able to be with it very long. I got to go to me because it ended up being like at 10 a.m., which was 9 p.m. their time. And these guys stay up late. They hadn't even eaten supper yet. So anyhow, we get on a WhatsApp video call, and Shaquille, you know, he's very gracious. He introduces, of course, we know Nisha, and his 4 kids are up there all playing. They're sitting on the couch and playing. And he introduces to his older brother and his older brother's wife. And we could see their kids playing in the background. And you know, we offered greetings to them and all the people and said hello to them. Hardly anyone could speak English, but we did the best we could. And then Shaquille brings up the cake, and here it is, you know, 9th wedding anniversary, and they cut the cake, and then the kids are all in it, and they're all feeding each other's little bites of cake, and they take off a piece and they offer it through the camera, like as if I could take it or John could take it, and just as sweet and laughing and playing. And then after that, we went to dance. So they put on some music, and so Shaquille and Nisha dance. They just do they do their traditional dance and maybe a minute's worth, and then they step right, and then the kids get up and they all start dancing, and they're dancing and they're good, really good. They knew all these moves that I could tell that somebody taught them how to do that, or they watched somebody. And so what the point I wanted to make is after a while, everything calmed down and they were back on the couch, and John had already had to leave. He was only able to stay about 10 minutes, and we were together about 45. And he says, I want you to bless our marriage and bless us, you know. And so, you know, I did. And you know, it was not like, and that's what it was. He asked for a blessing. And so I did. I prayed a blessing over them. I'm sure you have done this to people, pray a blessing. But when I did that, I thought about this record here. And you know, that old Eastern, you see, we're in the Mideast. Some of these ancient cultural things still live in that part of the culture. Now, where they got it, how it got handed down to them, it could be very modern. It could be they just saw it in the Bible and they just learned it and they think this is a good deal, I'm going to ask for it. So it was a wonderful time. And then after everything settled down, Shaquille and I had a heart-to-heart talk back and forth. He expressed so much gratitude to our fellowship. He says, you know, all this stuff that you see that we've accomplished here, uh, we know God is in it. He says, I had the energy and the desire to do it, but practically speaking, I could have never got it done without you guys. If you hadn't have been there to financially back us with prayer and finances, none of this stuff would be here. And he expressed wonderful gratitude toward uh, our fellowship and the Tomberlin's fellowship, because both of these fellowships were primary in giving financially as well as a lot of prayers over this period of time, year or so that we've done it. So he, with the new camera, the first thing on the new camera, he's going to, matter of fact, he showed me a snippet of him starting the video of a video of gratitude that he's going to present to us in our group here and also for the Tomberlins. So that I wanted to share that about blessings because I think it's important. And when someone, and a lot of times there could be a prophecy in blessings too, you know, as you're praying, God has something to say for those people. And it was just wonderful. And they were real grateful. And it's just a real sweet time. So back to Genesis. And it's a big deal. And so I told you that story. And one of the things I want to point out here is Joseph exemplifies humility and respect when he introduces his family to Joseph. And, you know, ensuring their settlement to Goshen. These are some of the points, kind of insights here and life lessons. His actions reflect a leader who balances familial family duties with national responsibilities. Now, the life lesson, you guys who do expository teachings, you know, a topical teaching is when you teach on a topic and you might go all over lots of different scriptures. And expository teaching is mostly what we do every Thursday night, verse by verse, expository, verse by verse. You get the whole picture and scope. Expository teachings, I think, are very profitable. But one of the things that are a challenge is you need to bring, how can you apply something from the past and bring it into the future? You know, that's one of the goals of an expository teaching. And sometimes it's a challenge. And what I try to do is I try to find these things that they did that we can do. So a lesson that we can learn from him is effective leadership involves humility. We saw how he responded to Pharaoh, his respect for authority and commitment, and his commitment to the well-being of others. You don't see Joseph talking about himself. He talks about his family. So he's very focused on others. And I think there's an important life lesson there. And another one here is with Jacob, despite all his hardships, he blesses Pharaoh, acknowledging God's hidden hand. And this kind of acknowledges God's hidden hand in human affairs. So he takes the time to acknowledge this guy, and recognizing and honor God's role in our lives enabled us to bless others, even those in positions of power. You know, Pharaoh is kind of like the most powerful person on earth, maybe, or at least in that part of the country. And here comes Jacob and his band of shepherds. And so in the whole social network, they're not too spoken highly of, but the entree was given because of Joseph's love for God and how he dealt so righteously with people. So I think that's a good life lesson. Back to Genesis chapter 8. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? In other words, that's a fancy way to say, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, he just didn't, he gives them the long version. The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and hard have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not reached the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. I'm not, it's been tough, but I'm not as old as my fathers, and so he's not. And we'll get into that a little bit later. I've got written down the ages of Abraham and Isaac, but it's kind of interesting here. He kind of talks. He talks about days of sojourning. Well, what does that mean? It could mean a couple things. Of course, they moved around in Canaan, looking for the grass and water. But another thing is this world is not our home. We are all sojourners. It's not our home. Jesus in John, let's take a look here. I don't have this pulled up yet, but we can get to it pretty fast. I need to get to a different screen. I probably should have restarted mine because this thing is wanting to be difficult. So anyhow, here we go. Now it's getting on the way. Let's take a look at John 8, the Gospel of John 8, and we'll go into verse 23. And this is what God said about him, or Jesus said about himself. And he said to them, his disciples, you are from, oh no, sorry. Whoops, context there, he's talking to some of the Jews. You are from beneath, I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world. He considered himself a sojourner. In Philippians, a very familiar verse to you Bible people here, and the people I'm sure that will be listening to this video. Let's look at Philippians chapter 3 and in verse 20. 3 and 20. Our citizenship is in heaven, from which we wait for the Savior, our Lord Jesus Christ. So he's talking about his sojourning. I think it's a combination of traveling around, plus he knew our lives are temporary on earth, and we've got much to look forward in the future. But he's talking to him. It's kind of funny to note that he's kind of talking to him. He's very open with Pharaoh. It's kind of like he's an old-time friend he hadn't spoken to in a while. Few and hard have been the days of my life. Well, we can understand that, right? Just think about Jacob's life. From his youth, the difficulty with his twin brother Esau, we read about that, the struggling, the pain during that time, deceiving his father along with his mother, and having to run for his life from Esau. The difficulty with his wives, Leah and Rachel, and the concubines, that was not fun. Difficulty with Uncle Laban, even Laban went chasing after him, wanting Rachel back. Remember that? They had to set up a pile of rocks out there in Canaan and said, don't cross this area. And we said, okay, we don't like each other and we're not gonna mess with each other anymore. And the pain of the thought of losing his favorite son, Joseph, which is resulting in 22 years of grieving. Well, we can see where he could say that. But I think it's safe to say that Jacob, as we see Jacob, how he dealt with the loss of his son, he's a little bit of a victim. He is a little bit of a victim, and he lets other people know. Now, however, on the other side of Jacob, he achieved most everything he aspired to. He got the birthright, he got the blessing, he got to marry Rachel, who he wanted to marry. That's a hard time. Took him 7 years, 14 years, but all those things came at a price. The constant struggle between him and Esau, the price of fear and probably guilt during the long exile. He felt kind of bad, kind of messing him up, getting the birthright for a pot of stew, and then dressing up like Esau and getting his dad's blessing. And he had to run, and his mom said, go, That's the last time he saw his mom. He got Rachel by having Leah imposed upon him. He was supposed to get Rachel, and then old slick Uncle Laban over there slipped in Leah, and he had to do another 7 years. He lost Rachel in early death to childbirth. So he had quite of a life. Another way to look at it is he was a realist. He wasn't sugarcoating his life. His life was hard. He didn't deny it or say it was something other than what it was. So that's a good thing. He was a genuine, and so that's what it was. And here's a lesson for us. Let's take a look in. I'll go over to Acts 16. You can turn if you want to, or just listen to it. I'm going to go to John 16:33, chapter 16, and in verse 33. Okay. Now we know that you know all things and do not need anyone to ask you a question. This is why we believe that you came from God. Okay, that doesn't sound like what I want. Oh, I read the wrong verse. I have told you these things so that in union with me, you will have peace. In the world, what are you going to have? Hardships. But have courage. I love this phrase. I have overcome the world. In Acts 14, I'll go there quickly. Acts 14 and in chapter 22. Strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith, and saying that we cannot avoid going through many hardships on our way into the kingdom of God. We all know this, right? This is not news. We've all gone through pain and brokenness. We've lost loved ones. We've had health issues, relationship issues, kids issues, you name it. Financial issues, emotional issues. Everything. We've all been broken and hurt throughout our lives, and there's no way to avoid it. It's the present evil age. It happened to Jacob, and we deal with it as well. Now, back to Genesis 47 and verse 8. I'm going to pause here for a moment because we're talking about years here. He was 130 years old. Those of you who like biblical chronology or like this, those of you who don't will probably think it's really boring. But I'm going to take just a few minutes here to go over this. The chronology of Jacob. Okay, we just read Jacob is now 130 years old. Okay, now that's when he stood before Pharaoh with his son Joseph. Now this is still the second year of the famine. Joseph was promoted by Pharaoh when he was 30. So Joseph became second in charge when he was 30. Now, since Jacob is 130, Joseph would have been 39 at this time. And I'll show you why that is. So if Jacob was 30 when Joseph was 39, well, we know that from previous. Jacob would have been 91 when Joseph was born. Now, stick with me here. It gets a little bit numberish. That would have been the last year of the 2 7-year terms of service that Jacob owed Laban for marrying Leah and Rachel. So Joseph was born right then at the end before they left. So that he would have been 77 years old when he got married to Rachel. Add 14 years to 77 makes him 91 when Joseph was born, because he had all of his kids during that second year term that he was serving Laban, all except the youngest Benjamin. You think, oh my gosh, 11 kids in 7 years? Yeah, you can do it with 2 wives and 2 concubines. Leah had Reuben at the end of the 7-year period because he had to work. He thought he was working for Rachel, so he didn't have any wife for 7 years. And then slick Uncle Laban slipped Leah into the marriage tent. And not long after that, here comes Reuben. So they have Reuben and all the other kids during that second 7-year term. So Reuben was not born to Leah until the first 7 years had been completed. He actually had 11 sons during the second 7-year term of the 14 years of service. The only son he did not have that time was Benjamin. And you'll recall they were on the road. They were traveling when Rachel had Benjamin and she died. in childbirth, and she was buried there in one of the areas that they were living. The name of that area uh, doesn't come to mind right now, but that's when little baby Benjamin was born. So he was the only one of the 11 that wasn't born in that 7 year period. I didn't know that. Maybe you didn't know that. I think it's kind of interesting. But you can have a bunch of kids if you got 2 wives and 2 concubines. I don't recommend it, but you could. And we know now that God tells us that we should have one husband, one wife. And we know in the Old Testament, the two should become one from Genesis, but we know this didn't happen. Sometimes they had more than one, but every time, and sometimes there are very good reasons because, for safety reason, if you lost your husband, what are you going to do? There wasn't a lot of options back then. So if you had married somebody, then he could protect you, provide for you, etc. But if you read every record, it didn't go well. There's something about having more than one wife in the house. Somebody's going to get upset about something, and it's going to end up being the guy's fault. At least he's going to get the blame for it. Maybe that part isn't biblical, but that's just funny. So anyhow, uh, Jacob said that they had not reached. He said he had not reached the days of the years of the life of his father. That's right. If he's 130, Abraham died at 175, and Isaac was 180. So that's pretty good, right? So let's get back to Genesis chapter 10. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh, as we read, and he went out from the presence of Pharaoh. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession of the land of Egypt in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses. Now, this is also Ramses and called, you've got a new name here, Ramses. And it's also called the land of Goshen. So the land of Ramses doesn't necessarily mean that Ramses was the Pharaoh at the time. Now, if you check it out on AI and different stuff, who was the Pharaoh? They oftentimes will say Ramses II, because a lot of the people who figured out chronology don't believe in the flood. And so they have the Egyptians living before the flood, and so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And another thing that doesn't make sense about Ramses II is he's a mummy. Okay. If Ramses II is a mummy, how could he have died in the Red Sea when he was chasing after the children of Israel, right? Remember all that history? So it can't be Ramses II. So we know it's not that. Now, I did AI searches and I put in the chronology. I think in the chronology RED, the Exodus was supposed to begin in 1455 BC. And so I asked AI to run records, and they think it might be Tutmos the second or third, and it might be somebody else. Who knows? I tried to find, well, was there a Pharaoh that did a lot of construction because he would have had all the slave labor? And yes, I forget the name of the one who built the first huge pyramid. It could be the children of Israel helped build the pyramids. We don't know. That's just a speculation. And we don't know who was really Pharaoh, but we know whoever was died in the Red Sea chasing after the Israelites. So you can look that up. It's kind of fun to check that out. You might draw better conclusions here. Let's go back to 12. Joseph provided for his father and his brothers and all his household with food. He made sure they were fed according to the number of their little children. Everybody got fed. The little kids didn't miss out. The old people didn't miss out. They were all fed because Joseph took such wonderful care of them. There was no need. There was no bread in the land. So we continue here when the land becomes Pharaoh's. We're going to study this next part. 13, there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan was wasted away because of the famine. Good thing that Joseph and the family headed to Egypt and were being taken care of by the plenty that was provided there and with Joseph. So Joseph, he started collecting money. And when not started, Joseph collected all the money. Matter of fact, he's been collecting all the money. People are running out of money because he made them pay for the grain. That was part of it. They ran out of all the money that was in the land of Egypt. and the land of Canaan for the grain they had bought. The people had spent all they had trying to buy food to live. And Joseph brought the money to Pharaoh's house. See how he's an honorable man. He didn't keep any for himself. He takes the money to Pharaoh. Verse 15. Now, when all the money of the land and in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan had run out, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die right in front of you? Because just because the money's gone." But they're saying, "Well, give it to us anyhow. We don't have anything to pay for it." But no, Joseph's got another idea. He said, "Well," Joseph said, "since your money is gone, give your livestock. You got livestock, don't you?" And that's where this is kind of a point here that maybe they were vegan, because how come they hadn't eaten the livestock? You see? So that might point to being vegans. You can think about it, maybe, maybe not, but it kind of makes sense to me. So they had livestock. And he says, "Give me your livestock and I'll exchange it. I'll give you bread in exchange for livestock." So what'd they do? They brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses and for the flocks and for the herds and for the donkeys. Egypt is famous for their horses, Egyptians, and all these livestock. So he helped them survive by providing them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. Okay, well, now the livestock's gone. When that year had ended, they came to him the second year and said to him, "We cannot hide from my Lord, since our money is all spent and the herds of livestock are my Lord's. There's nothing left for my Lord but our bodies and our lands." So they're getting pretty serious now. "Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we will live and not die, and so that the land won't be desolate." So they're desperate, but they come up with a plan. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt to Pharaoh, because each Egyptian sold his field since the famine was severe on them. So the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made them servants from one end of the territory of Egypt even to the other end. But he did not buy the land of the priests, because the priests had an allotted amount from Pharaoh and ate their allotted amount that Pharaoh gave them. And that's why they did not sell their land. So Pharaoh had his god priests, the idol priests there, and he took care of them, kind of like Jezebel and Ahab did. So that land stayed to them. But then Joseph said to the people, Joseph's very fair. Look how he administers this. They've given up their land. They said, "Make us slaves, make us servants. What else can we do?" He said, "Behold, today I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Behold, here's seed for you. Sow the land." So he gives them seed to sow the land. And at the harvest, you are to give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4 parts will be your own, for the seed for the field, for your food, and those servants of your household, and the food for your little ones. So he comes up with a plan. "I'm giving you this," and it sounds a lot like that 1/5 deal that he did on the 7 years of famine. So they saved it all up, and he gave them seed. So what they were actually doing here, they were going to make themselves servants, and they did, but they still kept the land to farm it, and all they had to do was give 20%. Joseph provided the seed, they provided the labor, and they were able to live. And they said, "You have saved our lives." In other words, good deal. We'll take it. "Let us find favor in the eyes of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." And Joseph made it a law concerning the land of Egypt to this day. That would have been the day that Genesis was written by Moses, however many years after that was, that Pharaoh would have 1/5 only the land of the priests, and that alone did not become Pharaoh. So Pharaoh is becoming very wealthy under the situation. But Joseph is doing the right thing. He's not just giving handouts. You have to work. I'm not, he had the food there, but he didn't say it's okay, you can do nothing. I'll just give you the food. He said, okay, you go do the work, I'll give you the seed, you raise the crops, you get to keep all of it except 20%. So Israel settled in the land of Egypt. They sure did, just like God had prophesied that they would, in the land of Goshen, that rich, rich land in that area. And they acquired possessions in it and were fruitful, and they multiplied exceedingly. So this is that prophecy coming to pass. Now, here in the last week here, Jacob lived in the land for 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, he made it to 147. It's kind of interesting here. And I mentioned this the other time. It's noteworthy that Jacob and Joseph were together the first 17 years of Joseph's life. And again, the last 17 years of Jacob's life. The days grew near for Israel to die. So he called his son Joseph and said to him, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please put your hand under my thigh and deal with me in covenant faithfulness and truth. So he wants his son to make an oath. And the common way of making an oath was the person making the oath would put their hand on the, what does it say here? Under my thigh. And that's how they made the deal. Now, this, I'm not going to go into some of the other stuff on this. You can look it up for yourself. It's very descriptive and very, what? They did what? But I'll let you figure that out. But they put their hand down there, and this is how they made their covenant. Please do not bury me in Egypt. But when I sleep with my fathers, you are to carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. And Joseph said, I will do as you said. And Jacob said, swear to me. And Joseph swore to him, and Israel bowed down and bowed his head down at the head of his bed, which was kind of a way to, say, God, this is it. We made a deal here, and I expect it to happen. And Joseph is good to his word. Matter of fact, it's even if you watch the old movie, The Ten Commandments, remember when they were leaving and the little kid asked the old man, what's that? And he said, those are the bones of Jacob. I think that's what he said, if I remember right. So anyhow, Jacob didn't have to stay in Egypt. So next week, Jacob is still alive. He hasn't died yet. He's going to say blessings on his family, and we'll get into that next week. Heavenly Father, Lord Jesus Christ, thank you for your love. Thank you for the beauty of your word, the pleasure it is to study, the excitement of the word, how you deal with people, how people dealt with each other. Thank you for your grace, your mercy, your goodness, and all that you do to bless us and help us in our lives with so many things that you teach us about your goodness. So bless this group tonight and all those who couldn't attend tonight, and for a wonderful evening of sleep and a great, beautiful weekend, a spring weekend coming up here this weekend. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Stop recording.